Welcome to Peace at Home Parenting. I'm Aaron Weintraub, our Chief Product Officer and a teacher here myself, as well as a father of three, a 20-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 7-year-old. And I have the great honor and excitement of speaking today with Joe Freeman. Would you like to introduce yourself, Joe?
Sure. Thank you, Aaron. Well, they say that I'm one of the co-founders of Peace at Home Parenting, which I think is true. And I'm also a father and a grandfather and a stepfather. No, I'm sorry, a foster father. So I have a 47-year-old son at this point and a 37-year-old daughter. And depending on how we count it, I have 4 or 7 grandkids. So I interact with 7 as my grandkids. I have 4 biological ones. So anyway, I'm very happy to be here.
Well, I think between the two of us, Joe, if we add all of that up, including your youngest grandkids, we span the entire age range that that most people will be as they listen to this. So I think we can safely say that we're in the trenches with you when it comes to figuring out fatherhood and who we want to be in the world and who we want to be with our children. And Joe, I want to jump right into it. We're here to talk about fatherhood and Father's Day. And something we had just kind of touched on right before we started was a question that I wanted to start with, which is at Peace at Home Parenting, we talk a lot about parenting and parents, and you're a parent if you parent. But not so much about the particular roles and the unique experiences, challenges that come along with fatherhood or motherhood in particular. And so I'd like to start by asking you what's meaningful or interesting or true about the role of fatherhood, talking about it separately from just parenting.
Okay. Well, actually, this has been researched, Aaron, and what they have found that fathers are very unique. And some ways that they are unique is that they're much more, for the most, in the broad picture, there are exceptions for individuals, but in the broad picture, fathers are much more physical with their kids. They will throw their young kids up in the air, or they'll play roughhouse with their younger kids, and mostly the kids just are delighted by that. Even though sometimes mothers get concerned about the kids getting hurt, we've actually found that rough tumble play is actually good for brain development. So it's a very positive thing, and hopefully it can be fairly safe. I think kids don't get hurt too much. Another thing about fathers is that they often have more kind of energetic, spontaneous interactions with their children, and they often bring a sense of humor. Even when they're disciplining their children, they'll bring a sense of humor to that, and make it and often will make their interactions very playful. Again, that I think is a very positive kind of thing. It can avoid power struggles. Obviously, there are authoritarian fathers, but we're talking about fathers, I think, at their best here. So they all have those very unique kinds of traits.
Okay, thank you. I love that, and it's important to me. I pulled out that you mentioned playfulness as sort of an encapsulating term for that levity and humor and physical play that tends to be a father's role. I've primarily heard or talked about this topic from with Ruth Freeman, your parenting partner, and founding partner of Peacestone Parenting, which it seems like sometimes, as in context of speaking to mothers about playfulness, she'll say often fathers find this role more natural or fall more naturally into this than others, and it strikes me that what that's pointing to is that dynamic may, could or may feel unfair to the other parenting partner and exist within that family parenting system. And so I like how you articulated that, because it gives parents the language to have a conversation about it that's not leaning more heavily on the duties and responsibilities side, but reframes it in terms of different ways of nurturing.
Yes, yeah. Well, I think, if obviously if the father is seen as the one that has the most fun with the children, mothers can get who are doing these endless tasks, and often I think are attending to details probably more than fathers are. Quite honestly, they can get resentful that somehow the dad gets to have all the fun, and then they get to be kind of the bad one. So I think it's important to be sensitive to that dynamic.
Right, and I think, what a nice resolution would be both partners feeling the freedom to move towards, incorporating both of those elements, but in a way that might look different for them. So one parenting partner recognizing that playfulness is the father's nurturing language or activity, but her nurturing activity or her playfulness may serve a different function or look differently. So I grew up raised pretty much entirely by my mother. And I had an experience as my first job out of college was working in a preschool. And it was all women teachers there besides me. I was the only man that was working there. And it was an interesting experience for me to have all of my nurturing models have been women, and the other sort of mentors and coworkers be women in the center, but finding that the kids looked to me more naturally for a different type of nurturing in terms of that rough and tumble play, like you're mentioning, and sometimes even looking to it for boundaries and behavioral expectations in a different way. And it was an interesting experience for me to learn that how to be nurturing as a man, as a father, and recognizing that sometimes looks different than the role of the mother. Is there anything else that you can say about what nurturing might look like from a fatherhood perspective outside of that playfulness dimension?
Well, as you were talking, I was thinking about my own father, and certainly most of us in my generation, which is probably 2 or 3 generations ago now, but I think many of us were raised perhaps by very authoritarian fathers that demanded pretty much absolute compliance. And there could often be harsh punishment if that compliance wasn't forthcoming. I think that those of us that were raised by authoritarian fathers, it becomes a challenge of how do we not throw the baby out with the bathwater? How do we be firm and friendly? And how do we perhaps avoid the extremes of harsh punishment? I think that's another issue that fathers may have. And also the other thing I think going on with fathers is that many of us were raised by fathers who were obsessed with their work, that their work took over their lives. And if you were going to fit into time with them, you had to do it by working along beside them somehow, or being at work with them. There wasn't this modern concept of fathers being available to the child in a more child-centered kind of way. So I think that sometimes it's a stretch for some of us to make that switch from an authoritarian, work-oriented father to becoming a what I think we would call a balance between being firm, but also being friendly and being interested in the child and having fun with the child and not instilling fear in the child, but hopefully taking delight in the child and letting the child relax with us. So that comes to mind. I'm not sure that answered your question, but I was just thinking about that as you were talking.
No, I think it did. And something that I loved from that, I heard a therapist tell me one time that the majority of people who came in who experienced trauma from intergenerational trauma or trauma from their parents, when the story that came out that was most salient to them, it was most often not one of a parent being harsh or loud or abusive or dangerous. It was an experience of going to a parent with something that they were delighted in and getting a neutral reaction that showed disinterest. So what that pointed to is this idea that showing up isn't enough. Maybe that gets you to zero, but for a child to feel nurtured and to grow attachment requires that extra step of taking delight, which is often facilitated through playfulness. So I love that because it points to something that we can do. It can feel a little overwhelming to think about the weight of multiple generations of models of fatherhood that may not fit with who we want to be with our children. What would you recommend to folks who maybe didn't have ideal models or the model of parent or fatherhood that they want to be, who may be afraid that they're passing on or embodying those traits themselves? How could they use their own awareness of their story to avoid that trap?
Well, I think I'm speaking a little bit now as a therapist, I guess, but I think the reality is that we all do take in the parents that we had. So we to use a fancy psychological word, we introject that father figure. That father figure is somehow part of us. And when we identify with that father figure part of us, we actually feel and think and behave the way that internalized father figure felt and thought and behaved. And so that can catch us by surprise. Like the first time that happens, we think, oh my goodness, what happened? I don't want to be this kind of father. But yet we're feeling and we're speaking and we're behaving exactly as that father that we said we would never be that way. We're behaving exactly that way. So I think that just being able to recognize that is a part of us, to name it, to give it a name. What we can name, we can tame, and I think even give it a humorous name, maybe the name of the father, or maybe just a funny name that takes away some of the power of that internalized father. But I think it's important just to know that we do have that inside of us, and then I think also it's nice to reparent our own neglected or hurt or rejected inner child, at whatever age that may be, and see if we can become genuinely interested in that part of us and give that child good attention or take delight in that child the way perhaps our father didn't have time to do or didn't make time to do, which I think can become a self-healing process.
Thank you for being my conversation partner on such a topic that's important to both of us, and it's exciting to be able to talk to expert and father who I admire so much. So thank you, Joe, and happy Father's Day to you.
Well, same to you, Aaron, and it's always an absolute pleasure and delight to see your face and hear your soothing voice and to have a conversation with you.
Well, thank you, Joe. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.